Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we're back to continue with the show. Freedom comes from God, not government. God's true plan for mankind is freedom, achieved through faith in God. You misplace your faith in any other entity of man or of men, your faith will be used against you, and you will be betrayed and enslaved by those parties in whom you misplaced your faith instead of God. This, my friends, is the history of the government of mankind through the eons and the ages. Okay, so last couple of weeks I've been reading from the article, The Broken Tax System, which is available on my website, taxfreedom.com. It's right there up near the top of the center panel. And last week we were concluding with the section that lays out that the 16th Amendment doesn't create any new powers of taxation, nor does it create any new subjects subject to federal tax other than those persons who were already subject before the 16th Amendment, which did not include American citizens nor their labor as a subject of taxation. Impost taxed foreign persons and foreign activity. Duties taxed exported goods, and excise taxes commodities, licenses, and privileges. And no power reaches the labor of the American people, which is not subject to taxation. Previous to the 16th Amendment, as it turned out, is not subject to taxation after the 16th Amendment. The whole thing is a fraud. So let's pick up with the article. The 16th Amendment, although referred to in argument, has no real bearing and may be put out of view. As pointed out in recent decisions, it does not extend the taxing power to new or accepted subjects, but merely removes all occasion which otherwise might exist for an apportionment among the states of taxes laid on income, whether it be derived from one source or another. This is citing Brushaber versus Union Pacific Railroad and Stanton v. Baltic Mining, the two original decisions handed down on the constitutionality of the income tax, where the court rejected the argument that the tax is a direct tax, which is how it's being enforced today, and endorsed the tax as a function of indirect taxation, where income is the yardstick that measures the amount of tax owed on the earnings, profit, income derived from a federally taxable activity subject to the impost, duty, or excise. But if there is no impost, duty, or excise that applies to the activity, then there's nothing to measure. There's no tax. You don't just use the yardstick as the object of the tax and tax people's earnings and income because they made money, because they exercised their right to work. That's not in the law. That's not what's in the law. What's in the law is collection of the tax at the source, the duty to collect the tax. First, by withholding agents from 1913 to 1945 and forward, only from foreign persons, and then by employers from anyone who asked them to withhold it, regardless of the fact that there's no tax imposed. Well, that's what's really going on. And the Supreme Court has said no new powers, no new subjects, repeatedly. Everything the IRS does is a complete and total lie. And anyone who wants to say otherwise, call into the show. Let us know. Let us hear. What's the problem? Explain it to me. How do you take subject matter jurisdiction under the 16th Amendment when there's no authority to write law because there's no enabling enforcement clause? And the only thing the courts can enforce is constitutionally authorized law. Where no law is authorized, it has to be voluntary if it's under the 16th Amendment. No? Explain it to me. How does Congress write law under an amendment where no authority to write law is granted? All the other amendments have it. Let's go on. These holdings of the Supreme Court in 1916, of course, merely reasserted the court's long-standing recognition of the constitutional fact that the federal taxation of labor is not a constitutionally granted taxing power. as labor has historically been perceived by the courts as a constitutionally protected right and outside of the granted internal excise taxation powers. Now, here's a long cite from a Supreme Court case. As in our intercourse with our fellow men, certain principles of morality are assumed to exist, without which society would be impossible. So certain inherent rights lie at the foundation of all action, and upon a recognition of them alone can free institutions be maintained. These inherent rights have never been more happily expressed than in the Declaration of Independence, that new evangel of liberty to the people. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that is, so plain that their truth is recognized upon their mere statement, that all men are endowed, not by edicts of emperors or decrees of parliament or acts of Congress, but by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That is, rights which cannot be bartered away or given away or taken away except in punishment of crime, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these, not grant them, but secure them, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Among these inalienable rights, as proclaimed in that great document, is the right of men to pursue their happiness, by which is meant the right to pursue any lawful business or vocation. It has been well said that the property which every man has in his own labor, as it is the original foundation of all other property, so it is the most sacred and inviolable. This is from Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which was quoted in Justice Field's concurrence in Butchers Union versus Crescent City County, probably. Justice Field was not alone in his assessment. He was joined in his concurrence by Justice Bradley, who joined by J.J. Harlan and Woods, also concurred, but on the basis of Field's reasoning, stated at page 762, the right to follow any of the common occupations of life is an inalienable right. It was formulated as such under the phrase pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence, which commenced with the fundamental proposition that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This right is a large ingredient in the civil liberty of the citizen. Included in the right of personal liberty and the right of private property, partaking of a nature of each, is the right to make contracts for the acquisition of property. Chief among such contracts is that of personal employment, by which labor and other services are exchanged for money or other forms of property. If this right be struck down or arbitrarily interfered with, there is substantial impairment of liberty in the long-established constitutional sense. This is Justice Pitney writing in Coppage v. Kansas, 236 U.S. 1, 1915. Going on. But the fundamental rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, considered as individual possessions, are secured by those maxims of constitutional law which are the monument showing the victorious progress of the race in securing to men the blessings of civilization under the reign of just and equal laws. So that, in the famous language of the Massachusetts Bill of Rights, the government of the Commonwealth may be a government of laws and not of men. For the very idea that one man may be compelled to hold his life or the means of living, or any material right essential to the enjoyment of life, at the mere will of another, seems to be intolerable in any country where freedom prevails, as being the essence of slavery itself. This is from Yik-Wo v. Hopkins, 118 U.S. 356, 1886. The Chinese railroad labor laws or disputes. But the lower federal district and circuit courts have reversed this clear indirect income tax holding that was made by the Supreme Court in 1960 by invoking as controlling not these controlling Supreme Court cases that are the decisions made by the Supreme Court, Brushaber and Stanton in 1916, but instead the courts now invoke their own contradictory inferior opinions from the below list of inferior circuit court decisions that openly declare, erroneously and treasonously and seditiously, in my opinion, and obviously so erroneous, that the federal personal income tax is authorized by the 16th Amendment as a direct unapportioned tax that is laid on all of the income of all persons, without restriction and without any constitutional limitation being applicable to the new power to tax created by the 16th Amendment. And of course, there's just all sorts of problems with that claim. The word direct isn't in the amendment. There's no enabling enforcement clause to let Congress write law for a new power allegedly created. The Supreme Court rejected the contention that it created a direct tax. The Supreme Court rejected the contention that it wasn't an indirect tax. The Supreme Court rejected the contention that there are any new powers created. They rejected the contention that there are any new subjects created. They rejected the contention that the amendment did anything at all except harmonize the operation of the taxing powers, making income a function of indirect taxation where it's not necessary for the indirect taxes to be laid in proportion to the census, or laid in proportion to the census, or apportioned to the states for collection. So by the 16th Amendment relieving the tax of those limitations, because it's indirect, that's not a problem. It's only a problem if you try to make up a direct tax when the word direct isn't there, and that interpretation engineers an irreconcilable conflict with the provisions of Article 1 requiring direct taxes to be apportioned to the states and laid in proportion to the census. You can't use one clause of the Constitution to engineer a direct and irreconcilable conflict with another, particularly when the word necessary to engineer the conflict isn't present in the amendment or the clause. The word direct isn't in the amendment. If you add it, you destroy the Constitution's founding principle, because the founding principle is that we have a representative government of only limited powers. If the 16th Amendment creates a power to tax without limitation, it's created an unlimited power. And the power to tax is the power to destroy. But all powers are limited. All taxing powers are limited. The 16th Amendment doesn't do away with the central precept of the entire Constitution and institute in its place the second plank of the Communist Manifesto. Graduated taxation isn't in the 16th Amendment. It's not in the Constitution. What's in the Constitution is uniformity. Graduated taxation is in the second plank of the Communist Manifesto. That's what these circuit court decisions I'm about to read are enforcing. The second plank of the Communist Manifesto. Not any legitimate interpretation or application of the Constitution. None whatsoever. This is all a fraudulent rebellion being conducted in the circuit courts that for some reason the Supreme Court has not reined in and terminated. This is where everything begins and ends. It's wrong in America. This is where the government thinks it can steal your money and spend it recklessly. This is where the government thinks it rules you. This is where the government thinks they can put you in prison if you won't do what you're told to do, being a good little slave. This is where your freedom is taken. This is where your earnings are taken. This is where your quality of life is taken from you. This is where you are chained to the debt owed to the Federal Reserve Bank like peons. This is where the class warfare that has now split America 50-50 and burned down the city districts in half the cities in America. Black Lives Matter. This is where the class warfare begins, is with the tax brackets of the income tax system. The Communist Manifesto. It's not constitutional taxation. Okay, sounds like we're coming up on the next break. Maybe I'll read the circuit court decisions that they're using to overrule and overturn the Supreme Court. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour. We'll be back in 5 after these words. Okay, this is Thomas Fried on the Liberty Works Radio Network. Why don't we just get right into this? This is the list of cases that the IRS and the DOJ cite in the various different circuits to try and establish that the 16th Amendment created a direct tax. And remember now, the cases that the Supreme Court ruled on were done in 1916. They ruled twice in Brushaber versus Union Pacific and Stanton v. Baltic Mining, both times upholding the tax as a function of indirect taxation and rejecting the argument that there was any direct taxation involved at all. So, 1990, United States v. Collins in the 10th Circuit in 1990, which simply asserts the tax is direct and unapportioned out of thin air, reversing Brushaber while claiming to cite Brushaber, but doing so without actually citing or quoting any text at all from that case opinion. So Collins just says, here's what they decided in Brushaber and reversed it. And that's what they cite now as an authority. There's no text, there's no opinion. It's a Collins going, this is what they said. It's he said, she said. This is going to the horse's ass instead of the horse's mouth. Why on earth would you go to a circuit court like Collins instead of going to the Supreme Court decision, the horse's mouth? This is referencing the horse's ass and listening to the gas passing through the ass instead of going to the horse's mouth, the Supreme Court decision handed down 75 years earlier. Why'd Collins try to rewrite it in 1990? Next one, Parker v. Commissioner, 1984, which also asserts the tax is direct and apportioned, reversing Brushaber, again without citing or quoting any actual text from Brushaber. Because there isn't any. There isn't any text that supports the opinion being reversed, being decided here in reversal of the original. These two are both the same. They just add a thin air, whole cloth, they make it up. Oh, this is what Brushaber said. Excuse me? Well, then why don't we go read Brushaber? Because that's not what they said. You're reversing Brushaber through these rebellious circuit court decisions. In 1984, in the 7th Circuit, Lavelle v. United States, which simply cites to Parker v. Commissioner to make its assertions. Good grief. United States v. Sloan, 1984, which simply cites to Lavelle and Collins to make its assertions. And in R.E. Beckrith, which simply cites to Lavelle and Parker. So this is just circular references, the circuit courts pointing to each other, nobody bothering to read the Supreme Court decision, just all claiming it says exactly the opposite of what the Supreme Court ruled. This is judicial sedition of the highest order. This constitutes treason, in my opinion. There is absolutely no doubt that today the IRS agents and officers assess the personal income tax within its institutional practices only as a direct unapportioned tax that applies to everything, not just impost duty and excise taxable earnings, everything. And it's allegedly authorized under the 16th Amendment because of these decisions reversing things. And according to their claims that are routinely made in all of their correspondence letters seeking payment and enforcement of the federal personal income tax, every single one of the IRS letters, how come you attack 16th Amendment, 16th Amendment, 16th Amendment? That's the only thing they say. They're lying. In fact, today, the United States IRS labels as frivolous any assertion or argument made by any citizen asserting that the income tax is not authorized as a direct and unapportioned tax. They've gotten away with this lie so long now, it's frivolous. Disinformation to tell the truth about what the Supreme Court really said. They've just labeled their disinformation frivolous for 40 years. They're the ones with the frivolous position. It's not an unlimited power to tax everything. There are no unlimited powers to tax. They're the ones with the frivolous position, and they've been enforcing it for 50 years and getting away with it. Here's their position, verbatim, from the frivolous positions document. Position number 6, contention. The 16th Amendment does not authorize a direct, non-apportioned federal income tax on United States citizens. That's the contention that they say is frivolous. And here's their argument. Some assert that the 16th Amendment does not authorize a direct, non-apportioned income tax, and thus U.S. citizens and residents are not subject to federal income tax laws. The law. The constitutionality of the 16th Amendment has invariably been upheld when challenged. What nonsense! The constitutionality of the 16th Amendment? What nonsense! What nonsense! It says nothing! The Constitution, of course, it's in the Constitution. The question is not whether the amendment is constitutional, idiots. It's what legal effect did the Constitution have without an enabling enforcement clause and without the word direct in it? And numerous courts have both implicitly and explicitly recognized that the 16th Amendment authorizes a non-apportioned direct income tax on United States citizens and that the federal tax laws as applied are valid. In United States v. Collins, remember Collins? Citing to Brushaber versus Union Pacific, but they didn't cite, they just inferred, and noted that the U.S. Supreme Court has recognized that the 16th Amendment authorizes a direct, non-apportioned tax upon United States citizens throughout the nation. And that is not a quote from Brushaber, that's made-up fiction by Collins. There's no such quote, there's no such decision, there's no such holding, there's no such ruling in Brushaber or Stanton. That specifically is rejected. They have taken a paragraph where a proposition is tested and are holding it out as the decision of the court. It's pure 100% fraud. And anybody with a 9th grade reading ability can read Brushaber and see that for themselves. I'll warn you, it's written to be difficult to understand, but if you focus on it, you'll see it. Relevant case law. In R.E. Beckrith, remember Beckrith? Again, the circuit court decision that reverses Brushaber by citing to the other circuit court decisions that already did it. How disingenuous are these thieves? How disingenuous! The court affirmed a failure to file conviction, rejecting the taxpayer's frivolous position that the 16th Amendment does not authorize a direct, non-apportioned income tax. 1989 in the Ninth Circuit. United States v. Collins, the court found defendants' argument that the 16th Amendment does not authorize a direct, non-apportioned tax on United States citizens similarly to be devoid of any arguable basis of law. No, it's absolutely the only arguable basis of law that exists. What's devoid of any arguable basis is that the 16th Amendment creates a direct tax, because the word direct isn't in the amendment. Everywhere else in the Constitution where it addresses the power to tax directly, the word direct is used in the clause. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, no capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census hereinbefore required to be taken. Everywhere else the word direct is used. 16th Amendment, Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on income from whatever source derived, without apportionment and without regard to any census or enumeration. Where's the word direct? It isn't there. You have to make it up. And that's what they've done, is they made it up. It's judicial legislation. Judges making law unconstitutionally. They just made it up. This is treason, sedition. This is crime against America being perpetrated by the judges, who are the enemy of the people as long as they continue to commit this treason and jam communism, the second plank of the Communist Manifesto specifically, down the throats of the American people and compel them to a practice of it. Lovell v. United States, 7th Circuit in 84, the court rejected the argument that the Constitution prohibits imposition of a direct tax without apportionment, even though that had been the court's position for 220 years, and upheld the district court's frivolous return penalty assessment and the award of attorney's fees to the government because the taxpayer's legal position was patently frivolous. The appeals court imposed additional sanctions for pursuing frivolous arguments in bad faith. So the courts have basically been telling Americans who know the Constitution and argue it to shut up and sit down, that you don't have a Constitution. It only means what we say, not what it reads. This is judicial legislation. This is treason. This is betraying America to impose socialism, specifically in the form of communism. You need the second plank to back up the fifth plank, which is the Federal Reserve Bank, isn't it? A central quasi-government bank with a monopoly on currency and credit. That's the fifth plank. And if you're going to print paper money, you need to remove it from circulation, and that's what the income tax does. This is all communism. Straight up communism. Pure 100% socialist communism. That's what the politicians and the judges have been enforcing on the American people. Broughton v. United States in the Eighth Circuit in 1980, the court rejected a refund suit stating that the 16th Amendment authorizes imposition of an income tax without apportionment among the states. Yeah, but is it direct or indirect? Doesn't want to address the critical function, just make the crap up. Stearman v. Commissioner. Oh, here they cite a tax court memo as their authority. Nobody wants to read Prishaber or Stanton, the Supreme Court decisions that control the issue, but they'll read you a tax court memorandum. The court imposed sanctions totaling $25,000 against the taxpayer for advancing arguments characteristic of tax protester rhetoric that has been universally rejected by the courts, except for the Supreme Court. It's only been universally rejected by the socialist lower courts. You know, the people that made up Roe v. Wade, made up affirmative action, made up agencies writing law by regulation instead of Congress. They just made it all up to steal power and authority to rule the country rather than represent it. They don't want to represent. They want to rule, and that's what this is all about. Stealing your political and economic power before it can be exercised, and then making its exercise at the polls 100% meaningless. The faces change, but the game remains the same. Lie to the people and steal half their earnings. Give it to family and friends and corporate business partners. Buy stock in the companies ahead of the announcement, and everybody gets wealthy except the common man who pays for it with blood, sweat, and tears. Blood, sweat, and tears. So it is absolutely irrefutable that the IRS revenue agents and officers operating today only assess the personal income tax as a direct tax without apportionment or any other limitation, in blatant violation of Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, and Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, which have never been repealed and were not amended in conjunction with the adoption of the 16th Amendment. The only way to give full force and legal effect to all the provisions of the Constitution without using one to destroy the other, breaking the foundation of law in our nation in half, and thus breaking our society in half on precisely the same lines that the legal foundation, the constitutional foundation, has been broken. Precisely the same lines. The 16th Amendment cannot be legitimately used to violate the Article 1 provisions. They were not repealed. It's particularly true that you cannot adopt such inherently irreconcilable violative conflict opinion when there's one that harmonizes the operation, and that is, it's part of indirect taxation. It doesn't have to be apportioned. There's no problem. Income is the yardstick that measures how much tax is owed on the impost duty or excise taxable activity. It's indirect and no problem. Okay, I think I hear the music coming up for the end of the show. I'll be back next week with more. I'm going to continue working my way through this article because we're coming to the part where Donald Trump's legislation in 2018 guarantees you and proves it's an indirect tax under Article 1. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. We'll be back next week with more.